What is up, guys? We are back again with another episode of the podcast. And in today's episode, thankfully, we're not joined by Gary. I know he ruins the podcast for everyone's experience. You don't need to tell me. But we are here with another fellow triage coach in Shane. Shane, how are you?
Not too bad. Enjoying the first day of 2023 so far, at least.
Yeah, so for some context, we are actually recording this very early in the morning on the 1st of January. So we're just highlighting the fact that we're both getting after it from day one of the year.
No hangovers.
Nothing. We're straight into it, straight into work. But anyway, look, we're not here to talk about that. We're not here to talk pleasantries. We already had our pleasantries, Shane, before the call, or not before the call, before the podcast started, I should say. But what we are here to talk about is actually, we're here to talk about a lot, but the highlight of it probably is going to be your experience last year, because you actually did quite a lot last year. You accomplished quite a lot in two different, distinctly different sports. Obviously, there's an overlap, as people will be aware, but in two different sports, you competed at a very high level. You achieved pretty fantastic results, I would say. Like anyone looking at that from the outside would be like, wow, that's pretty impressive. Before the listeners, what did you do last year? What am I even talking about?
So last year, I competed in both powerlifting and bodybuilding. So started the year finishing off my powerlifting for the year with a competition in Irish Nationals. So at that, I total 700 kilos. So total essentially is your combination of your squat, bench, and deadlift, and the the combination of those three led to 700. Nice round number. So working towards that for, I suppose, since I started powerlifting, really, because that was like a number that when I started powerlifting, I was like, I don't think I'll ever really get to that, and if I get to that, I'll be pretty satisfied. And then after achieving that, I knew probably the year before, if I achieved that number, then I'd be probably in a good position to start a bodybuilding prep, because I'd probably have a decent amount of muscle by the time I lift those loads. So that's what I did. I did bodybuilding prep last year. So yeah, last year now, Jesus. Uh, it was a 36-week long prep. So once nationals was finished, pretty much had like a bit of a week interlude to kind of enjoy a week of not being extremely focused on like a particular goal. And once that week was finished, got straight into the bodybuilding prep. So pretty much 25, 26 weeks until my first show from March to September. Started shows in September and then finished them in late November. So competed three in Ireland and two in two national federations, one in an untested federation, and then after that was like international shows in the UK, in Hungary, and in the US.
Yeah, so as I said, guys, Shane did a lot last year. International competitions, it sounds good. But before we focus too much on this year, right? That's just a little bit of context for the listeners, right? I want you to start back at the start, right? So young Shane, you start off in the gym, right? And the reason we're starting here is because, again, this stuff it takes time. It takes years to develop, first of all, an idea of what you actually want to achieve from all of this stuff. Not everyone wants to do powerlifting. Not everyone wants to do bodybuilding. Some people just want to, lift weights, be healthy, whatever, right? So you probably came into this whole journey not going, oh yeah, I want to have a 700 total. Oh yeah, I want to do a bodybuilding competition. Well, bodybuilding competition, you maybe did come into it thinking that, because a lot of us started in our teens going like, yeah, like I'm gonna go do a bodybuilding competition. I want to be jacked. I want to be lean. But bring us back to young Shane starting off.
Yeah, so I think I've been pretty fortunate in the sense that I grew up playing sports like my entire life, really. Like I started playing sports like when I was like 6, I think. And I started off playing like soccer, badminton, probably not the most like let's see, strength specific sport, but
Great
look,
hand-eye coordination.
yeah, it's a sport nonetheless, right? And so yeah, I pretty much grew up my entire life playing sports, got into a very good kind of sports school when I was in secondary school, where pretty much all me and my friends had to do after class was we had to stay in the school until like 7:30. So we just had to play sports and stuff like that to keep yourself occupied. So got involved in a lot of sports, and one or two of the sports that like I really stuck to were like GAA and rugby. So through like playing them, I was like in positions where being strong was ideal. So I played like midfield when I played Gaelic, I played back row when I played rugby. So for those positions, like, you know, when you're young, you can get away with being like maybe like the kind of gorilla on the team, which I was like one of those kind of gorillas when I was like in first to second year. But then, like, you know, as soon as everybody else hits puberty and starts to catch up, you need to start doing things to kind of distinguish yourself and kind of make yourself a little bit stronger along the way. So I started just doing like push-ups and sit-ups like most nights, because they're the two basic exercises that you do, right, to get better at sports. So just started doing them pretty much every night for like 1 or 2 years. You know, got decently stronger, got decently bigger. Did it improve my sports performance? Don't really know. But like, you know, from there I kind of like really got involved with, you know, I suppose strength training or some kind of physical development. Seen some results from it, like, you know, physical results that look pretty cool. And then once, like, you know, got into, I think, transition year, got access to the school gym. That's when I started like actually lifting weights for the first time. So I already had like a bit of a base behind me in terms of like physical development from, like, you know, playing so much sports. Then as well through like just doing literally, I suppose, calisthenic training at home. And then once I got into the gym, had a good base of strength. Didn't really know what I was doing at the time when I got into the gym, but I love going in there. I love going in there. I love pushing myself. There was a guy who was like kind of overlooking us after the kind of classing period had finished, to make sure we weren't acting the bollocks. And he was big into the gym, and he like showed us some of the kind of ropes as to, like, number one, like, you know, how to actually train hard, because, like, you know, you can go into the gym and just be like pissing away, like, you know, kicking the leg extension with no real kind of intensity, having no real kind of structure to your workouts. And he essentially kind of said, right, here's, like, you know, a bro split to follow. I'll bring you through, like, you know, each one of the sessions, showed us how to, like, you know, actually push ourselves in the gym. And then kind of from there, I kind of understood, okay, this is what each session should look like in terms of, you know, a flow to it in some respect, and actually like how I should feel during the session and after the session. And that, like, just by following that from like transition year to, like, you know, like when I graduated, I had built like pretty decent physique at that stage. And then like college started, I suppose.
Yeah, and just on that, I think it's actually, first of all, in this day and age, people have access to such good information. Like, you don't even realize how shit, because you're nearly as old as I am. We're getting old. How shit the information you actually used to get exposed to was. Like, people complain these days, being like, "Oh, social media is so bad," but at least you have some access to information. What we had was crap, absolute dog shit, right? So you find yourself in a position where if you have we'll call them a mentor, someone to guide you, someone to show you the way, it actually saves you so much time. And that is still the case to this day. But I just always think it's really interesting how humans are just such natural like teachers. Like, we want to show each other what we know. Like that guy who was watching over you, like, he probably didn't get paid to show you guys how to lift weights, probably didn't get paid to do anything, but he was like, oh, look, I want to help these guys. I want to show them. Like, he obviously enjoyed the gym. He was like, this is what I know. This is what I do. This is how I structure. Probably wasn't perfect, probably wasn't, you know, anything fantastic. He probably picked it up from those crap fucking magazines and whatever else that we were exposed to. But at least it started you on the path. At least it started you going like, oh, okay, so this is how I train hard. This is how, you know, I should maybe think about structuring a workout. And again, the reason I'm emphasizing that is because even a poorly put together plan is better than no plan. You know, like, you just have to go out, you have to execute. And that's something that I think a lot of people, they get this paralysis by analysis, and they're like, oh, what should I do? Should I do this? Whatever. You just need to go out and work hard. Like, the results will come. Yeah, okay, you can get faster, better results if everything is dialed in. But the first step is hard work, you know?
Yeah, it's very true, because like I could tell you right now, like when I was following that plan, like it didn't have like the optimal frequency per muscle group. It didn't have like all the exercises laid out to fit my biomechanics. It was actually like bare bones. These are like 4 or 5 lifts to do each session. Turn up for those sessions, train hard, like, you know, with a friend, and just be consistent with it. And like that was sufficient enough at the time to like get me where I wanted to be. Like if you asked me back then, like if I was very happy with my results, I would have said like 100%. You know, and even like my nutrition wasn't the best back then. Like, I was eating a shed load of food because as young was very active. So I probably could get away with like, you know, having a little bit more kind of like lax nutritional practices, but at the same time, like it was really just kind of executing the fundamentals, which I do think, you know, people can kind of gloss over, because people do kind of want the, like, you know, the one thing they're kind of missing, like the kind of the sexy kind of secret that, you know, they're kind of missing out on, and it's unfortunately just not the case. It's just, again, consistency over time, like, you know, applying yourself really, really hard, and that will get you like a very, very far along the way.
Yeah, and I think that is a big thing that people fall down in this day and age, where we want the sexy, we want the new, the novel, the like, oh, this is exciting. You know, you go on social media, you see all these new exercises randomly put together, whatever. When really people just need to focus on fundamentals. And I'm actually writing a few articles for our website that's just like, this is just the baseline stuff. This isn't really in-depth, you know, niche, like really dived into every single point, but it's giving you this template going like, okay, here's how you do nutrition. Here's the basics of training. Here's the basics of sleep. Here's the basics of stress. Just so you can go somewhere and go, okay, that's what they think the fundamentals are. So when we reference the fundamentals, eventually there will be stuff up on site where it's like, there's the fundamentals. We can talk about the sexy once you're doing these fundamentals, you know? But the only reason we're laying this groundwork is because there's young Shane, right? You've gone off to college now. You're like, okay, I have a decent base. When did you start thinking about, okay, actually, I want to push training a bit more. I want to, you know, maybe do powerlifting. Maybe I want to do some bodybuilding, because there's a point, I think, for a lot of people where they can go kind of two ways, where if you're a really good responder to training, which I would say you're a moderate responder to training, like you've got good results, but I wouldn't say you're just a super athlete, hyper responder. Like you go into the gym and you go, boom, muscle just fucking packs on you, strength just packs on you. But it's not like you're a non-responder, like a low responder. It's not like you're like, oh fuck, like I'm not getting any results, I'm doing everything right and nothing's happening, right? You're a kind of moderate responder, which I think actually, surprisingly, a lot of people fall into that case, and they don't really realize, because they're not consistent, right? They think they're a low responder when really they just need to train for longer, or maybe train a little bit harder, right? And it's rare that you see these like hyper responders, right? So you're fucking bang average, right? Sorry.
I definitely would agree, because like at the end of the day, like if I was an extremely high responder, like I would have won every single show that I did this year. I would be in like the top 3 of like my weight class in powerlifting, right? But like it's just not the case. Like I've been if I didn't have the results I have now after training the way I've been training for like the last 14 years or whatever, since I was 15, like I would actually be like shocked. I'd be disappointed, you know.
That's why I always say, people go like, oh, you must be on steroids or whatever. I'm like, if this is the results you get from steroids, I want a refund.
I need a new dealer.
Yeah. But right, so you're an average responder. And again, as I was saying, like people can kind of go two ways. If you're a really good responder to training, it can almost disincentivize you, because you're like, oh, I can always just do 8 weeks of training and I'll be in good nick, right? So they don't stay consistent. Then you have the opposite case, where you get these people that are really like low responders. And again, they can go two ways, where they're like, oh, like I'm just not getting results, so I'm not even going to try. Or they're like, I'm not getting results, I need to go deep on this stuff. I need to really figure out how to get results, because I don't get results. So I want to know what's wrong. What am I doing wrong? What am I missing out on? You know? So was there any point in that kind of journey when you got into college where you were like, okay, maybe you're just keeping up good habits, you're ticking away, doing your gym 3, 4, 5 times a week? Like, especially for guys, a lot of the time, there's a social aspect to it as well, where you're like, I'm going with the lads to the gym or whatever. Now I go to the gym in the morning, so all the lads are like, oh, I'm sleeping. Ridiculous. But there's a social aspect to it. College. What's the timeline there? What's the kind of beginnings of the vision for you?
So I think like when I got into college, probably like a lot of people, I was a bit of a lunatic in my early years. Like, you know, I was definitely prioritizing more drinking and partying than studying and training. That's just some honesty there for you. But like, you know, then, you know, training was still happening in the background, very, very much so. Just wasn't as kind of consistent as like focus as it was like when I was in school. I'd given up playing rugby because I couldn't commit to traveling up and down from like Dublin to Drogheda, you know, 2, 3 times a week, as well as like giving up days of the weekend where I could be working and earning money to play sport. So training was like my only actual kind of like physical outlet like left after growing up all these years with sport. So I think like naturally, as I was like going through the process of like, living the college life and having training going on in the background, I did get to a point where, I wasn't necessarily seeing the same kind of level of results as I once was when I was in school. And I did need to start kind of like level up like my kind of approaches as such. So I did start like following some people on like YouTube. I remember like it was around the time when like Rob Lipsett actually started his his YouTube page. I got a few friends who like went to school with him, and like I started like following some of the stuff that he was saying, and it was pretty much like is very like kind of basic but straightforward stuff like time your rest periods. Here's how you do your double progression model with like your actual kind of sets and reps or whatever like that, and I just started following that, and then just from doing that started to get good, like better results again, started to get stronger, started to get bigger, and then discover more information like how many times I should be training my muscle groups per week, started getting more kind of results from that. Found out like about different splits as opposed to just bro splits, so started following that, like got better results. Found out about how to like track macros, and then started doing that, started getting better results yet again. So all through like the kind of college process is kind of finding all these kind of little drips and drabs of information and just applying them over periods of time. Like, because like one thing I was just very diligent with was like, once I did find out about some kind of method, I very much wanted to be consistent with it for as long as I could, because like I knew if I just kind of chopped and changed things, then like I wouldn't see any kind of results realistically. And also there is like a learning curve for any of these like methods as well that you do need to kind of familiarize yourself with. So it was probably like when I got through to my Erasmus year and I was over in Spain studying a degree that I just didn't really want to do, but I found myself like getting involved in like reading more fitness content. Training was like taking off. I was starting to get even better results when I was over there, and I was like, right, I probably would want to do something with fitness like after college. And from there I was like following more kind of bodybuilders, I followed some powerlifters, and I was like, that's probably something I'd like to do at one point, but I don't really know if it's like right for me at the moment, because I've got like limited training experience. And I actually like, thankfully I found out about like natural bodybuilding very early on. I think that's through kind of the process for like finding Rob, then finding like Eric Hams, finding Team 3DMJ, who are my current coaches. And through kind of finding all that information, I was like, oh right, so I don't actually need to like take steroids to kind of compete in bodybuilding. I can do it like naturally, which was fantastic for a broke student who can barely afford protein, right? And so I started to train for a few more years, and then once college was finished, I didn't go straight into like a kind of graduate job. I actually just applied for like my PT cert, and I knew like competing in something was something that like had been left on the back burner for so long, because I hadn't done sports in ages, but I'd gotten to like a level of like physical development and like strength, where I was like, you know what, like I'm kind of sick of being like the kind of strong guy in my little kind of gym, and I want to start to do something a little bit more competitively. Put it off for ages. I was continuing to like still go out a lot at the weekend and put essentially my kind of big goals on the back burner, because I just wanted to essentially, I suppose, deviate at the weekends very frequently, which meant that I went maybe like a few more years without competing than I could have if I actually prioritized what I really wanted to do. And I was only like 3 years ago at this stage where I actually committed to doing my first powerlifting competition, and that's, I suppose, the kind of journey thus far.
Yeah, and I think that's really important. A few things you brought up there. The first thing, especially for coaches or people who are just trying to learn about this stuff themselves, like this wasn't a boom, oh, I went to one course, learned everything. It's an iterative process. You learn a little bit of information from here, you learn a bit of information from over here, you put it in play, you go, okay, that actually works. Okay, maybe you don't understand the principles behind it, it's just a protocol. You're like, oh, like meal timing, you're like, oh, okay, people seem to say that this is a good idea. I'll put it in play. Oh, my results are a bit better. Like, you don't understand the principles behind it, but the protocol works, right? So you're learning along the way. And I think that's really important to understand if you're a new coach, because you go on Instagram right now, or social media in general, and you see these coaches that are a million miles ahead of you, right? They're 10, 15, 20 years ahead of you in terms of their knowledge, their coaching, etc. And you go, I'm never going to learn that. I'm never going to be at that level. I need to know all this information yesterday, right? And the thing about that is, first of all, I know you still feel that. I still feel that. I'm like, oh, this coach knows a lot in this particular aspect. Like, I might know a bit more in this other aspect, but I'm like, oh, I want to know that knowledge, So it's always an iterative process. It's always like chasing information. There is no one resource where you can go, I'll go here, I'll learn everything. Like, you did your personal training certificate. That didn't teach you everything. That just gave you a certificate that said, okay, the bare minimum, the absolute bare minimum. Your foot is in the door now. And then the other thing that you noted is you were being consistent, or relatively consistent, right? But you were also doing things that actually detracted from your goals, right? So going out on the weekends, perfectly normal thing, right? But to do that, everyone has to accept trade-offs, right? Like, you can do that. That's cool. You can train your 3, 4, 5 days a week, 6 days a week, whatever it is, right? But if you're doing stuff that's actually detracting from that, you have to accept that you are actually detracting from that, right? If your goal is, oh, I want to be the best powerlifter, like I always call these asterisk goals, where people are like, oh, like I want to, I don't know, squat 300 kilos, but I want to, go out and piss 2 nights a week. And, I want to also be shredded out of my mind. And it's like, you have all these asterisks to this goal. Like, do you actually want to achieve the goal, or do you have these other goals which take more priority? And that's not to say that you can't have a multi-point goal. You can't be like, oh, well, I want to be 95 kilos and squat 300 kilos, whatever. Like, you can have these different goals that do have asterisks, but very often people have non-synergistic asterisks, right? Like, you didn't do powerlifting and bodybuilding at the same time. You did powerlifting and then you did bodybuilding, because you knew that they are synergistic one way, but they're not really synergistic the opposite way, in terms of, if you're at your leanest, you're not at your strongest, So when you're at your strongest, that's probably when you've built your most muscle. So that's great before you do powerlifting, which we'll get into now, before you get into bodybuilding, which we'll get into the overall arc in a second, right? And I think that's really important for people to understand. And I'm sure you do this with your clients as well, where people will come to you and they say, oh, I've got XYZ goals, right? And you're like, okay, well, let's actually plot out a timeline for this. What are we going to look at for the year? Especially, I know you have a lot of powerlifting clients, and also photo shoot, physique, whatever we want to call those type of clients. Like, I think a lot of coaching is actually planning out the year, so people go, okay, so I'm not trying to achieve every single thing at once. What I'm doing is, I have these competitions that I want to do. I also want to get a little bit leaner for a holiday. So how do we organize the overall year so that we can prioritize the right thing at the right time? I think that's one of the things that people really fall down on when they're training themselves. They just try to achieve everything all at once, and that rarely works out very well, right? So first of all, what are your thoughts on all of that? And then bring us into the kind of journey of the last 3 years, we'll say.
Yeah, I think that is very important in regards to the planning of everything, because you can say you want to achieve something in the next year, but then when you actually plot out the weeks and the months, and the actual kind of the reality of how brief a kind of year is, in the time frame it takes for you to reach your goal, it's actually a really short amount of time, especially if one of your goals is to do competitions, or go through different muscle gain phases or fat loss phases. And then that helps you kind of plan out, okay, is the processes that I am looking to actually do throughout that time frame, is that realistic at all for this time frame? Because I will get clients who will be like, right, I want to be X lean by this date. I'm like, okay, well, we're actually 8 weeks away from that date now. We actually don't have that long. Do you realize the amount you may have to suffer if you do want that level of leanness by that date? And it's like, okay, well, maybe we need to take a step back. Maybe we need to kind of manage our expectations here a little bit. And that's essentially what a lot of coaching is, isn't it? It is it's planning and managing expectations. And if you've been through the process a lot of the time yourself, you do kind of understand, like, what the trade-offs they may have to kind of make along the way or two, which, when you are trying to put your foot down and get involved in competing, like, depending on, like, what your environment is like, what your support network is like, what your life is like you will have to make like a lot of trade-offs. Like, within my kind of social circle, I wouldn't have a huge amount of, like, my kind of core close friends who, like, are really involved in the gym, who, like, even understand competing. Like, over Christmas, I've had like conversations with them, like, explaining, like, the difference between sports, like, why I would even put myself through what I put myself through. And, like, I suppose they don't necessarily need to understand it, like, to the degree that you do, but they just need to understand that, like, right, this is what he wants to do. Like, I'll support him nonetheless. And, like, I suppose that's probably one of the reasons why it took me so long to actually get into competing in the sport, because I didn't have the people around me who were like, yeah, go do that competition that you want to do. Like, it was just a case like, I want to do that competition, that's cool, but you're coming out at the weekend. And, trying to, separate myself from that and be like, oh, I don't really want to miss, like, that night out that literally pretty much happened last weekend, and, it's going to be the repeat of, like, the previous weekend, the previous weekend before that. Trying to kind of overcome that, like, fear of missing out as such. And I put this in an Instagram post there during the week, like, you'll be missing out on, like, that event, but, like, you couldn't miss out on, like, something bigger that you kind of achieve, like, long term if you commit to it. And, like I think now, like, after going through as much as I have over, like, the last 3 years, like, people are almost, like, more interested in, like, what you've done as opposed to, their own kind of nights out along the way. So you're not really kind of missing out on anything as such, but you will have the chance of, like, missing out on, like, achieving the kind of bigger goals that will add more kind of value to, like, your own life. Which is kind of like, yeah, like, for me, that has been competing. So I was supposed to go back to one of the parts of your questions, like, so yeah, started like, competing in powerlifting like 3 years ago. So I realized I couldn't just do it alone, and I got in contact with As Powerlifting when I was working as a PT in FlyFit, and then from there, essentially, just signed up to my first powerlifting competition. I didn't, like, have a huge amount of, like, competition specific training behind me. I think I joined ABS in, like, March, competing my first powerlifting competition in August. So what's that, like, 5 or 6 months, something like that. Whereas actually, like, following a powerlifting specific program. Before that, I was doing, like, strength training, but I wouldn't say it was really kind of tailored towards, like, me being the best powerlifter. It was, like, almost like a hybrid of, like, powerlifting and bodybuilding style training. And then just from that, did my first competition, went in with, like, no expectations because I've never done a powerlifting competition before. The aim was just to, like, complete all my lifts, have fun, do as best as I could. And I did pretty well for my first meet. I went 8 for 9. I only missed one lift on, like, a bench command, which was annoying. Look, what can you do? First time mistakes. And I think I was total, like, 620 or something like that for my first one. And like, yeah, I mean, that was, like, the start of it. And then once I got that first competition, I was like, right, I'm kind of hooked. That was really, really good fun. So I'm definitely gonna do more of these.
And I think that's really important as well, where you started out going, oh, I want to do some powerlifting, but you didn't just go, oh, I'll just, swing my big dick around and I'll figure it out along the way. You were like, right, who does it well? I think abs do it really well in Ireland. So you were like, okay, I'll get in contact with people who seem to have a process, seem to have a system that produces results, right? And I think that's really important when you do have bigger goals that especially aren't necessarily the more generic. Not to say, like, powerlifting isn't, it's a pretty big fucking sport, but it's not like your average Joe on the street is like, oh yeah, for powerlifting, this is how you train, whereas I feel like for body composition, there's a lot more information out there. A lot of more people will be like, oh yeah, like, I have a rough idea of how to train for body composition. Now, it might not be perfectly accurate, right, whatever, but I think it's really important that you reached out. You go, okay, so I need someone to teach me how to do this stuff, and that was abs. So after your first competition, you did all right. You did good, right? What happens after that? When did we start thinking, okay, this is actually something that I really want to pursue. I really want to push it. Because, you know, a lot of people go, oh, I'll do a powerlifting competition, and they do one and they're like, cool, I just wanted to tick the box, say I've done a powerlifting competition. Yeah, I've always gone to the gym. I wanted to do a powerlifting competition, see how big my bench was, you know? When did you start thinking like, okay, this is actually something that I could, I was going to say make a name for myself in, but you know what I mean? Like you could kind of go like, this is something that I could see myself competing in regularly.
I suppose part of it is like, you know, joining a community like that, like abs, because I was getting to train alongside like the best lifters in the country. Like, and I'm a competitive person. Like, always been like competitive, like in sports when I was growing up, and that kind of gave me that like competitive outlet once again. And also with powerlifting, like, you know, you get your total, you have an objective number which you can define your progress and bump that up over time and kind of see like, you know, your actual what you're doing in the gym, like adding up, literally adding up towards something over time. So having that as something that, like, you know, every couple of months when I do meet and be like, right, how am I doing with my training? Am I getting stronger? You know, if I see that total jump up by 100 kilos over years, I probably have gotten a decent amount of muscle as well. And just
just on that, just to sorry to interrupt, that's so important for people starting in the gym. Like, don't have this kind of internal focus of like, oh, I'm just going to, you know, work my muscles. If you have like an external objective where you're like, oh, I want to see my strength, my numbers going up on the bar, or whatever it is, you know, like that is actually one of the things I find is so powerful, especially for clients who maybe have some form of like body dysmorphia where they're like very focused on their body. Having something where it's like, okay, we're not going to the gym just to burn calories, we're not going to the gym just to work out, we're going into the gym to get stronger and to build muscle. So how do we do that? We get stronger. We focus on getting stronger and having that external focus. So strength goals, like it keeps you dialed in, it keeps you consistent, but it gives you that nice little bit of feedback, like you're saying here, where you're going, okay, I'm on track, what I'm doing is working. Whereas if you just go, am I building muscle, did I lose fat this week, it's very wishy-washy, it's very almost subjective. Whereas weight on the bar is objective. It's like, okay, I'm getting stronger, you know?
yeah, and I think like a big kind of driver for me committing to as well was that fact, because like even though like powerlifting was like my goal, like I was still very concerned with, like, you know, my body image and like how aesthetic I looked and the amount of muscle I had, like, because obviously, like, you know, most people, whether they want to admit or not, like they do care about it, like, right. So me seeing myself getting stronger and having this objective number like go up over time, that was my way of being like this is taking away the focus from my actual kind of body. But I know that the fact that I am pursuing all these numbers, and it's something that's keeping me very consistent with the process of actually training and showing up to the gym and fueling myself for performance, then that over time I will see the body composition changes that I want. And like definitely like in the back of my mind when I did start powerlifting was always the idea that I would like to do bodybuilding one day. But I didn't want to do bodybuilding straight away because, well, number one, I knew I did not have the muscle mass that I would need to actually be competitive. And again, as I mentioned, I'm a competitive person. I don't want to just show up and just be like be a number. Like even like when I did my first powerlifting competition, like I did want to be competitive, even though it was my first competition. I shouldn't necessarily have that goal. Which is again probably one of the reasons why I waited so long before I did it. But anyway, like bodybuilding was always there as like a kind of background goal, but I wanted to wait until I did have the amount of muscle mass that I thought would be needed to be competitive to get towards that point. But if I just like spent those years not having some kind of objective focus, or if my objective focus was, right, how many centimeters on my bicep grew like the last 12 weeks, like that would be, it'd be miserable. And like, you know, it would be very disheartening, because if anybody's like measured their bicep grow over like, you know, that amount of time period, like, you know, unless you're in gear, it's gonna be pretty disheartening.
Never measure your calves because they don't grow.
Yeah,
That's the key.
But yeah, so I suppose like once I got involved in like the more kind of competitive side of the powerlifting, like, and I was involved in the community, like, you know, training around the people who were much stronger than me. So it's no longer the big fish in the small pond, is now they're like a small fish in fucking bleeding ocean. That kind of like humbled me in a sense that, like, you know, it humbled me in, like, where I actually was in relation to like the actual best in the country, then in relation to the best in the world. And it also showed me how much more progress I could make, because like my kind of mindset, like with any of this kind of stuff, is like, well, if this guy's doing it, like, why can't I? And I think that's like, that's a kind of a mindset deficit that a lot of people do have, is like they see other people who have, like, these amazing results. For like, I'll never be able to get those results. It's like, well, if you'll never get those results if you don't try. Like, I will never never let myself down because of my efforts. Like I'll always like opt to train with the guys who are bigger than me down in the gym, because like, that's where I want to be. And if I fall short of like those goals because I tried, then I can't necessarily be disheartened. But if I decided to always kind of go down towards like the smaller acts and train the smaller guys and try to be the more kind of dominant guy, then like, then I'm just going to be kind of fooling myself realistically over long term. And that's, again, like when I wanted to go to do my bodybuilding competitions, I wanted to go towards like the biggest competitions that I could do, purely for that reason. I wanted to see where the gap was between me and the best, and like what type of work I need to do to get there. And again, if like, they're where they are, like, why can't I be there in like 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, and I think that's really important, where you can't control the results. Like there's no control over the results that you get. What you can control is your effort. That's what you're actually in charge of. You're in charge of showing up. You're in charge of putting your best effort in. It's not just, I ticked the box, I did whatever. You are in control of that stuff. Now, obviously there's external factors, you're tired, you have work, whatever, but the level of effort you put in, the consistency of that effort, that's what's going to dictate the result. But you can't actually control the result. Like in bodybuilding, especially, it's a more subjective sport. Like you can't control who shows up on the day. All you can control is how you look on the day. And the only way you can control how you look on the day is to do the habits and do the things that you need to do to look a certain way. And even then, it's not guaranteed. You could be like, oh, I ate some food, it was regular food, but it may be a little bit more bloated, a little bit more water retention, whatever, whatever, right? So you can only control your efforts, and that's what's going to dictate the results. But too many people focus on, oh, I want these results, and don't focus on their efforts, their habits, the stuff that they do day to day, but yeah, so you're pushing hard, you're doing your powerlifting, you've got this focus on, I want to be as strong as humanly possible. And like you said, I think it is important where people get their mindset opened up to what's possible. Like I've talked about it before in the podcast, but when I started in the gym, like I trained with a lot of people that were on steroids. And I just thought that was normal, in terms, not being on steroids, but just the ability to lift certain weights, to look a certain way. Like I was like, I didn't even know about steroids. I was just like, oh, this is just what happens as a natural consequence of going to the gym. You just get stronger. So I started seeing people like, I don't know, deadlifting in the 200s. And I was like, oh, that's just normal. That's just what you just keep training hard and you'll eventually get there. Like, I didn't know that they were on steroids, And now looking back, I'm like, oh, okay, so that's why they were doing that, But it actually expanded my horizons so much, in terms of like, I just see, like, I'll be in there like doing RDLs or something with 200 odd on the bar, and I'm doing it for a set of 8, and I'm like, yeah, that's just normal, because I grew up with that as being a normal thing, and I think that's what a lot of people are missing. Like if you just go to a commercial gym where people are just trying to get their quick workout in before work, and you're thinking, oh, I'm really, really strong because you're stronger than all these other 40-year-old individuals. Like obviously that's completely different than if you're in a powerlifting gym and you're training hard. You're training hard with all these people that are international competitors, etc. Right? Like most people have a mindset deficit, like you said, it's like, if you can actually expand that out, open it up, it changes so much about how you actually approach all this stuff.
Yeah, no, I would 100% would agree. And I mean, like, I suppose that's why a lot of people will also like kind of make themselves like not start, because they don't necessarily think that they can do, or they don't think that they will be good enough. Like where they are right now is good enough, or like that they will never be kind of in the position where they want to be. And it's like, you do really need to kind of put yourself in these situations and do kind of try, because like that's like the only way that you are actually going to see like, where you measure up to people. And I suppose like that's probably one of the toughest things about like getting involved in competing, is that like you are literally going to be measuring like your capabilities against other people, and that can for some people can be quite daunting, especially if they have never been involved in like competitive sports previously, because you know, like unfortunately it's very cliche, but like there always is going to be people who are going to be much better than you, like despite your efforts. It's just the way the way the world really. But like, you know, you do have to kind of get yourself involved if you do want to actually kind of see, you know, where you are going to stand and where your actual kind of potential is going to lie.
Yeah, like I always say, there's basically three things that you can compete against in this world. You can compete against yourself, you can compete against other people, and then you can also compete against nature. You know, so competing against nature would be like, oh, I climbed the mountain that was in a snowstorm or whatever, right? So most people don't generally want to do that too much, but you can compete against other people. That's what sports do. They help you compete against other people. But a lot of the competitions are actually competitions against yourself. You know, it's like competitions when your body or your mind is telling you, oh, like you should just give up, you should just quit, you should just do whatever. It's like you actually have to kind of have an alter ego that's competing against yourself. Are you making yourself better? Are you pushing yourself to be a better version of who you are? Are you stronger than you were yesterday? Are you stronger than you were a year ago? Like for you, for example, like I presume you don't want to compete in powerlifting until you are like, all right, I have a good shot of getting a higher than 700 kilo total, you know? Like it's not about just competing, it's about competing and being better than yourself, you know? Like I don't think, especially when you get into competitions for a longer period of time, like you don't really care about beating other people. Like obviously you're competitive, you want to beat everyone else on the platform, you want to have that gold, you know, but that's less about that's less about what it's about, and it's more about you being better than you were the last time you competed, you know?
Yeah, no, I definitely would agree. And I mean, like, that's kind of like, it's probably like the one of the tougher elements that I found of like doing bodybuilding, because like obviously I'd be able to compare like the two sports against each other. And like with powerlifting, I suppose like one of the reasons I got into that before doing bodybuilding, aside from the muscle mass thing, is like, well, you know, it does have that objective element to it. Like, you know, I get to compare my last performance to my current performance. You know, I am going to be assessed on my squat, my bench, and my deadlift. And like, you know, nobody can say whether I lift that weight up or lift it up and down or not. Like once I'm hitting everything to like competition standard, right? And I have that like objective marker of my progress. And regardless of where I place in competition, I can compare my actual kind of best to the last time. So that could be like, you know, a 5 kilo total PB, like that's all it could be, right? And if I go out and tell somebody, you know, they're like, oh, how'd your powerlifting competition go? And I'm like, I did 5 kilos better than the last one. And they'd be like, that's amazing, man. I could have placed like, you know, Paddy last in that competition, but it wouldn't matter because I did better than I did last time, right? Whereas like that's one difficult thing that I found about bodybuilding. It's like it didn't have that same like level of like objective marker for not only for myself, but then when people would ask. So like when somebody was asking me like how to get on the Europeans, I'd be like, I look better than I did last time, but I didn't place, you know, and they're like, oh, that I'm sorry to hear that. It's like no, I feel like I did better, but you know, I just don't have the placing to back it up, right? And it's like that's kind of annoying. Like you have to kind of be comfortable with that. Like yourself, you have to be quite kind of self-aware, I suppose, as to like, you know, like your own kind of capabilities and your abilities, regardless of like, you know, what other people may think. Because like I suppose with bodybuilding, you're not necessarily being like, you know, assessed on like something objective you're doing. It's more so like, you know, this is how I think you look in the day. Like this is how you meet my criteria, and this is how you stand up in that criteria against this other guy. You know, so that's kind of like one of the like the tougher aspects of like the sport, and like one of the reasons I didn't get involved in it for so long, because again, like, you know, with powerlifting, you know, regardless of where you start, you're going to have your kind of time to shine on the stage. You know, like you're kind of like 9 minutes there up on the platform doing your lifts. Everybody's going to stand up, everybody's going to cheer, everybody's going to like, you know, go mad when you get your last deadlift. Whereas like on a bodybuilding stage, like the audience for the most part, unless they don't know you, like they don't really care about you. Judges, you know, you could show up on a day and like the judges literally have one look at you and they're like, right to the side of the stage here, and that's it. Like that's your prep finished. You know, which like if you did not kind of build up like the kind of level of, I suppose, mental resilience to get to that point, and then that's your prep finished with that kind of disheartening experience. Like that'd be like, you never want to do sport ever again.
100%. And that'll bring us on to last year, I suppose. You competed in powerlifting and then you competed in bodybuilding. What did your training look like in the run up to powerlifting, like your last competition? And how did that change then going into bodybuilding? And then I suppose, how do you plan on changing it going forward? Because I know you now still have these kind of mixed goals where you're like, I want to push bodybuilding a bit more, but I also want to return to the powerlifting stage in the future. So take us through the last, I suppose, whatever year and a bit, and then how you intend to change things going forward.
Yeah, so I suppose I started towards like the kind of 700 kilo goal, like maybe like mid 2021 or early 2021, because like the previous competition I did, I thought like 660. So I was like, right, like the next kind of tangible goal for me to get in powerlifting is like 700. Like, you know, it's a big, nice round number, and it looks pretty cool. Again, we'll have reached a good level of physical development by that stage. So I started working towards that. Did a competition. I actually did worse in the final competition than I did in the last one. And one of the reasons for it, I would say, is because I was just continued to kind of, I was following the abs system, but I was self-coaching underneath it as such, right? And that meant that I was doing a lot of things that definitely were for my best interest, but also things that weren't for my best interest too. I didn't necessarily have anybody objectively kind of calling me out on like making poor like load decisions, which just ultimately led to me not having the best competition that I could have. Then after that, I did reach out for like one-to-one coaching through the system. And then that through that kind of process between like maybe August to March in nationals, I like went from like the 660 to 700 just through getting that one-to-one coaching and having somebody to tell me each week, right, these are like, you know, your lifts that you're doing, these are the lows that you should be doing. Don't do any more, don't do any less. You know, just having somebody there to actually, because I'm the type of person that like, I will, when I go into the gym, I'm always going to try push myself as much as I can. Like I will like, what is meant to be an RP7, like, you know, I'm going to push that up to like RP9. So I need somebody there to tell me like, you know, this is what you need to do. As opposed to like also auto-regulating myself, because I will just fool myself into thinking that it's like easier than it should be. So I needed that kind of coaching, and I was training like four times a week. I did have like one day in there that was like off program, which is pretty much just like arms and delts, because I wanted bigger arms and delts. Whether it happened or not, it's a different story. But I trained my powerlifting program like four days a week. Like Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, Sunday. That's how essentially I did the program, and then that pretty much lasted up until March when I finished nationals, and then when I did start doing my more kind of transitionary period from powerlifting to bodybuilding, I was following a similar program, but there was just way more volume attributed towards like more kind of like weak parts. So like things like my delts started getting a huge kind of boost in training volume, because with powerlifting program, like you're going to be attributing all your volume towards like your competition lifts and the variations that are going to help you kind of bring up those competition lifts, right? Whereas like with bodybuilding focused training, you're going to be attributing most of your volume towards muscle, towards your muscles, as opposed to towards specific lifts. So you're going to have a bit more kind of variance with like exercise selection. But I did still want to keep up, you know, squat, bench, and deadlift, because that's all I've been doing for like the last 3 years. It's a huge part of like my identity, and like I've gotten to the point at nationals where I was like the strongest I'd ever been. So I was like, I really didn't want to see like all that strength like fade away as soon as, and like, you know, just go from like squatting like 3 times a week to like just jumping on a hack squat. Just like I could not get the same level of like arousal for a session, like doing that type of thing, right? So I was like running singles pretty much like from March, when I finished nationals, up until May. And then in May, I think it was like May or June, I went over to Spain. And like the kind of main reason why like I was still doing powerlifting training up until that stage is because I still training down in abs. So to train with everybody down there, I need to be following somewhat of a similar kind of approach. I was training in a group as well. So like I had that kind of good group environment, you know, me and the guys pushing each other. And as well, it's like part of a community. So like I didn't want to like just go from like being this great community to like completely isolating myself and like doing my own thing. That'd be pretty tough. But then like during the summer, I went over to Spain for a few months, and that's when the time came where I was like, right, I think now is the time for me to like switch to a more kind of bodybuilding focused program. So like prior, I was doing like the 4-day training split, but that was like full body, which is like not going to be like the best thing really for bodybuilding focused work in my opinion. So I started like doing like more kind of upper lower split. Once I got to Spain, run that like 5 days a week, and I still was incorporating a lot of the power lifts, but they did start to like drop off in frequency over the coming months. So say we are at, you know, June now, so 3 or 4 months after the powerlifting competition, you know, I've transitioned from going from full body training to upper lower splits, more kind of muscle centric focused work. Then once we got to maybe June, I think I started to stop bench pressing completely because my numbers just started to decline. Like once I hit like sub 85 kilos, so I started prep at 94. Once I started to hit 85 kilos, the numbers just like, they weren't like cooperating at all. Progressions like weren't happening. I was really just like, you know, trying to like beat a dead horse essentially. So I just started switching out for things like, I did like a Smith machine press, did like machine chest press, dumbbell chest press, things that I could like have no kind of top end kind of metric to work towards, and have some new movements that I could set goals on, as opposed to just comparing my like leaner 85 kilo self towards like in my top level performance of like 94 kilos or whatever like that, right? And then just over the course of like the next few months, you know, things started to drop off even more so in regards to the powerlift. So I think once we got to August, just stopped squatting completely. Just the amount of actual like fatigue I was getting, like not only physically but like mentally going into sessions, because I was still squatting like decent amount of weight. Like by the time it was like 80 kilos, I was still like squatting like 200, and like while my body was physically able for it, the mental like mental effort I had going into the gym to actually kind of get myself ready to do that set, as well, like my bracing just was not what it once was. Like I described to a lot of people when I was like doing like deadlifts and like RDLs and like squats, even leg press towards the end of prep, like I felt like I was gonna snap a lot of the days. Just like the sheer load that you're using, and you don't really feel like you can kind of brace as well. So like yeah, through like the kind of whole kind of transitioning process, there was like a kind of incremental like switch from like, oh, okay, this is like the way you're training for performance. Okay, now it's training for like more muscle focus. We're gonna now switch from doing your more kind of full body training where you're getting a frequency per lift very frequently, towards training for upper lower split where you're trying to more optimally recover your body parts between sessions. Then started to gradually decline with the actual kind of specificity of the power lifts, to give you more kind of more bang for your buck exercises that are going to stimulate your muscles more often, as opposed to just driving unnecessary training fatigue. And then towards the end of the competition period, it was just a case of, okay, we don't want anything else in the program here. It's just going to cause more fatigue than is necessary, and everything is going to be geared towards like stimulation of like the muscles.
Yeah, that's just the last point there is really important for people to realize that, well, actually the whole point really, it's like, just because you have goals in certain exercises, or certain exercises are good exercises for a specific goal, such as muscle building, like, you know, you're like your squat, you know, it's not necessarily the best quad exercise, it's not the best glute exercise, it's not the best any of these exercises, but it gets a lot of stuff done, you know? So happy days. That's exactly the opposite of what you want when you're incredibly lean, fatigued because of low calories. You don't want something that hits everything, because that takes so much energy away from you. And like you said, there's also the mental aspect where you're like, oh, I used to be able to do 200 kilos for 8, whatever it is, you know? And you're like, now you're like, 180 feels very heavy. You know, you start actively seeing the numbers decline. And, you know, maybe on a relative scale, you know, it's like, oh, well, now I'm 80 kilos and I'm lifting X amount of weight. And it's like, this is 2.5 times body weight, whereas my best was only 2 times body weight, whatever it is, you know? You can make all these like jumps, but it's still absolute terms. the
Yeah.
number is going down. You're like, oh, I fucking hate seeing that, you know? So mentally, it's almost better to go, okay, well, I'm going to switch it out for something similar that I don't have these expectations on, and I can start pushing myself a lot harder on this exercise that is new to me, whatever, you know? But again, this is the coaching process. Like, you need someone to be able to tell you or help you make these decisions, rather than you going into every single session hating going to the gym because you have to get so hyped up. That's causing a lot of extra fatigue in general, because your central nervous system is what's, you know, facilitating that hyped upness. And now you're like, oh, it's taken me 3 days to recover from that training session because I had to get so hyped up. I had to, you know, drink 2 cans of Monster and a pre-workout just to be able to go into the gym. So making smarter choices isn't necessarily always in a line with, or always aligned with, what other people think smart choices would be, you know? So anyway, we're getting into the depths of prep. We're getting into very close to competing. How did your training change then after that? And then I suppose bring us into, you've done your competing in bodybuilding. Where do you see things going after that?
Yeah, so I suppose like once the competitions started, so between September to November, I did 6 actual competitions. So like there was a lot of, I wouldn't say inconsistent training, but the way the training was set up was not necessarily geared towards like progression as such. It was more so we need to do these sessions just from purely from like a muscle retention standpoint, which number one meant that we, as I said, like we pretty much dropped everything that was not going to cause excess fatigue. So like for the likes of like deadlifting and squatting, like they're pretty much gone, and it's doing like more machine based work. If I ever had a period where I had like 2 weeks between competitions, I would like bring like an RDL or deadlift back in just for like a week. And like even with that kind of intermittent kind of amount of deadlifting that I was doing was like definitely enough to kind of retain somewhat of like the kind of strength I had there. Um, but everything else was pretty much just geared towards, you know, getting into the sessions, stimulating the muscle, which was very tough from a mental perspective as somebody who does really enjoy training. To be going in and essentially just be like, right, I'm just going to match my numbers here. It's quite boring. And as well with that, like toward, because of those sessions, whether it is related to my physical state or my mental state, like actually just being in sessions, just dragging myself through the sessions themselves, you know, loading plates and bars was like a drag. You know, just didn't really want to be there a lot of the time. But you know, I still had to show up because like that was intrinsic to the actual kind of process of me getting on stage and still actually having some muscle mass when I got up there. So yeah, training was happening, but it wasn't as enjoyable as it once was. You know, still keeping the same frequency, still keeping the same training split. Like, you know, all of like throughout the entire of the actual kind of training itself, like for the most part, other than like the SBD movements, like the squat, bench, deadlift, like everything else stayed the exact same. Like all the rep schemes stayed the same. Like volume stayed the exact same. We kept everything as consistent as we could throughout the entire process, as long as I could essentially recover from it, and I wasn't getting like excessively bored. And I mean, like to a degree, I mean, like there will be some kind of boredom that creeps in during training programs, but sometimes that kind of boredom could be like the wall between you actually like making a breakthrough in progress, or you just starting something new and completely going down a new rabbit hole again and not making any progress, right? But like, you know, during a prep, to make kind of any extreme training changes during those last few weeks wouldn't be advisable at all, because number one, well, you're going to be relearning new movements, going to cause like more muscle damage, that could cause more inflammation, that could change like, you know, how your body is like recovering like throughout the week then, and then essentially make the look less predictable over the weeks. Because like, bear in mind, these last few weeks of prep, we are not just concerned about training, we're concerned with like how my body compositions looking, and like, you know, like how I'm looking like day to day, week to week. My check-in pictures, and like, you know, if we see that, right, we changed your training program, had all these new leg exercises, and like looking at your progress pictures here now, and your legs like don't look lean at all, like what's after going on? It's like, oh, you're just carrying a load of information, a load of water retention in your legs, so they don't look like separate at all. If you know you did that like the week before a show, or you trained your legs way too hard the week before a show, like I did like one of the shows, like you're not going to look as like kind of lean or like ripped in your lower body as you potentially could, right? So want to keep everything pretty much as fixed as possible. The less changes that you need to make in a bodybuilding prep towards the end, like the more repeatable the look is going to be, between like, how you look best during the week and how you're going to look best on stage. But also, like, it just means that you have to actually like manage less stuff. Like, ideally you want to just be able to like manage your food and energy output, like, for the most part. Like, you even want to keep like water and sodium, for example, fixed. You don't necessarily want to have to manipulate those too much. If you can just like manage those, like, energy intake and your expenditure, like, that would be like the ideal scenario for like any prep, right? So like that was essentially what like a lot of my peak week training looked like. Like, essentially coming into peak week, no training changes at all. Maybe like two days out from a show, I was like not training at all. But even like throughout, like maybe the kind of first half of the week was essentially like following more of a deload kind of protocol, where like reduced sets, and that was pretty much it. It's just going in with the idea of like, I'll just stimulate my muscles here, and then towards the latter end of the week, drop off any kind of fatigue that I can. So then when I show up on stage day, I look like as kind of rested and kind of lean and shredded as I possibly can.
Yeah, and this is the thing. There's a lot to bodybuilding training, not necessarily in terms of, well, there's a lot to it in that. I was going to say it's not necessarily in terms of the actual building, but in terms of the competing. But there is actually a lot to it in terms of the building as well as the competing, and this is the kind of stuff that you coach people through, or at least that you want to coach more people through. I know you do a lot of like physique photo shoots and stuff like that, but I know you have a goal this year for getting a few more people onto stage in terms of bodybuilding as well as powerlifting. So this is the kind of stuff that you kind of need a mentor for. Like you mentioned earlier on, like you
Definitely.
get coaching yourself, and the reason you get coaching is because it's actually so beneficial to have someone else in your corner helping you make decisions, because coaching is a collaborative process. Like, I don't know, my client comes to me, for example, and they're a new client. Like, I don't know what they already know about their body, so we kind of have to collaborate and go, oh, okay, so you find these exercises work for you, these ones don't, blah blah blah. You need someone in your corner. It really does help, especially when you have grander, bigger goals. Like you're saying, oh, I want to be competitive in powerlifting and I want to be competitive in bodybuilding. Like, you need someone in your corner helping you. So we won't get too far down the rabbit hole of bodybuilding specific training. We might get you on in a future podcast to discuss that stuff, and maybe even powerlifting specific training as well. And now, obviously, there's a huge amount with the diet going on. That's a huge part of bodybuilding. Well, yeah, more so than powerlifting. We don't touch on that too much. But take me through now. What's the plan, right? So you've competed, you've done all your things, you've learned a huge amount in terms of how to actually compete in powerlifting, and then how to actually compete in, can't even speak, bodybuilding. What's the plan going forward? What's the kind of thought process now of all that you've learned? How are you taking that into crafting a plan of action? I know you're still getting coaching, but again, it's a collaborative process. What's the plan going forward with training?
Okay, so like, I suppose like now I'm about 7 weeks post competition, and like straight away, like my kind of like main goal is like, right, I'm sick of being like so small. Like, even though I was like shredded and like I looked jacked, like in person, I was 76 kilo, right? And I'd lost a lot of what I would deem to be more valuable than like, my body composition. Like, but looking jacked is great, right? Look, it looks cool for pictures, but when you get there, it's not necessarily like the most appealing place to be. And especially as somebody who really enjoys training, I want to get myself back to being as strong as possible, because I knew that, I felt my best when I was heavier, bulkier, and stronger. Like, I love going into the gym, like, and like, it's for the ego, like purely, like when you're in the corner, like, squatting massive loads and people are like, what's going on over there? Like, I like that feeling. So I do want to get back to that. So for me, like, you can look at somebody in leg press doing like huge weight, but like, regardless of how many plates you have in that, like, nobody's being like, wow, like, because you can really kind of cheat your way towards like having 10 plates per side. So I want to get back into doing like SPD movements as soon as possible. So it was a case of, once I did get back from the States, I started like reintroducing these movements and started like reintroducing them like, one time per week frequency. First off, just get myself familiarized with it. And I started to increase the frequency up to like two times per week. And like now we're like 7 weeks post competition, and I'm pretty much 90% of the way towards my old strength of like, where I was like when I finished powerlifting, which is, it's a very quick kind of time scale, because like at the time you're like, I don't really know if this is like gonna come back too soon. Like I think like my first squatting session after Worlds, I did like 140 for like a very hard set of 5, and like I did like 182 the other day for 5, like pretty handily. And similar with like bench and deadlifts as well.
Just on that, you've been aggressively looking to add weight, body weight, I mean, not
Yeah.
just weight on the bar. And I think that's a huge thing that a lot of people don't prioritize out of a bodybuilding competition, but also out of like just a holiday, fucking I want to get shredded. Not to say that like if you're going to get shredded for your holiday, you need to gain 10% of your body weight back. But if you're down at like whatever, 70 odd kilos, and you're normally walking around at like 90 odd kilos, like you kind of need to start gaining some of that weight back to start feeling like your old self.
Yeah, definitely, like, because like as I said, like, when like last year, like in June, like once I hit like below 85 kilos, like that's when things like really started to like go awry for me, like in terms of like strength, in terms of like, my hormones and all that kind of stuff. So like that, all that stuff started to like get affected once I did like reach a certain like level of leanness. So post competition, we did want to start like adding more weight onto my body, pretty quickly, with the aim of like I want to get into a position where I could actually like train and recover to a sufficient degree, and actually like get to the point where like my body would actually be accepting like, new levels of muscle mass, as opposed to just like recovering what had to be recovered from what was lost over like the last few months. So like with that then, over like the last like few weeks, like it has been like kind of Christmas period, so like I've been training as consistently as like that kind of time period would allow me to, because I'm moving to Canada in like the next 2 weeks. So it hasn't necessarily been as consistent and rigid as like prep was, because I don't necessarily need it to be as consistent as and rigid as prep was, because the goal now for me is not like as immediate as it once was. So I'm not going to be competing in the bodybuilding season now until 2025. And like even now in terms of like powerlifting, I don't think I'm probably going to do a powerlifting competition till either like summer this year or maybe even closer to Christmas, because as like, you mentioned, I don't want to compete again unless I'm close to where I finished off powerlifting, or I want to at least be like even 5 kilos ahead of like where I was last time, right? So I need time to actually kind of build myself back up towards that. And unfortunately, it does take like a long time to get towards that like kind of level of strength, because like I suppose it would be like an elite level of strength, I suppose. So like I do need to kind of give myself time to actually build back up towards that. Like if I did it, like I actually qualified for the Irish Nationals this year, and like, I could have done it, but like if I was to do it and like total like 50 kilos less than I did in my last competition, like that would not be like satisfying for me. And I actually feel I feel I'd almost embarrass myself, because I'd be taking up a spot for somebody who could do better,
Yeah,
and deserves
it's almost,
it.
I would agree. It's almost disrespectful where you're
Yeah.
like on two sides. You're like, you're given this opportunity, but you don't want to take the opportunity from someone else who's been training just as hard and hasn't done a bodybuilding prep in the meantime.
Yeah, it literally be just being doing a competition for the sake of doing it, like, and again, I'm a competitive person. I don't want to compete unless I can be competitive. So I need to give me myself that time, and also just take my foot off like the competition kind of gas, so to speak, over like the coming few months and the coming few years, because like I think about like all the things that have happened in like the last few years building up towards this bodybuilding season, right? Like as much as I was doing competitions, I was also living a lot of my life focused on other kind of goals and other kind of things throughout my life. Like throughout those 3 years, like when I started powerlifting to when I compete in powerlifting, like there was like music festivals that I went to, there was nights out that I went to, there were periods of like times where I had like, 3 days off the gym because I couldn't get to the gym, or because like, I was suffering from like hangovers or something like that, right? Or I had more of my focus like geared towards like, improving my education or improve my business. And like, these were all things that, like, I could work towards at different periods throughout like those kind of 3 years. It wasn't all geared towards like, this is like my ultimate end goal. It just meant that like when I like entered into a competition, the actual kind of intensity towards one of those goals got turned up a notch. Right. And that's essentially the kind of process I'll be going through over the next 3 years. And again, I think about like all the progress I've made in all areas of my life through the last 3 years, and think about like the amount of progress I'm going to make in the next 3 years. And like, number one, like it's really exciting, but I know that I don't necessarily need to be like as robotic in my process towards like, my bodybuilding aspirations like right now, because I have a lot of time before I need to actually kind of turn up that intensity. And realistically, if I was to try to upkeep the level of intensity that I had like in those like last few months of prep, like it would be unsustainable. Like I'd have like no friends, I would have no clients, like, there it would not be a supportive process. And at the end of the day, like this is like bodybuilding, like competing, like powerlifting, all that kind of stuff, like that. They're hobbies, right? At the end of the day, like they're just like, nobody cares if I do them. Like the only person who really cares if I do them is me. Like, yeah, again, I might get onto podcasts like this to like chat about the experience, and it's cool. It will help some people along the way. But at the end of the day, if I don't do it, like, it doesn't really affect anybody else other than myself. Um, so like again, it's just like one of those kind of processes that is like very long and drawn out, and I don't think you necessarily need to have your. I don't think it needs to be like, I don't think you necessarily need to be as like single-minded towards the goal for an extended period of time to actually kind of achieve it either. Uh, because at the end of the day, like you need to have, unless you are a robot who has nothing else in their life, you need to have this more kind of holistic approach, all-encompassing mindset towards like the actual kind of endeavor.
Yeah, I think that is a really good analogy in terms of just thinking of it in terms of dials. Where like, look, right now I've turned the dial up on competing, right? It can't stay turned up forever, or else all the other dials have to naturally be turned down. And some of those other dials you need to do, like you need to have a job, you need to be able to have clients, etc. You also want to have a loving relationship. Now I know Emma was competing as well, so there's that aspect which we didn't really touch on, but there's all these other things that they're still key attributes or whatever you want to call them in your life that you care about. You can't just leave all those dials turned down just because you've turned one up all the way, you know? So, okay, it was turned up for the last while, dial that back down. It's still within the nice little like range of here's the minimum, that is acceptable, and here's the maximum. It's still in the middle somewhere. It's not like you're just doing the bare minimum. Of course, sometimes, some weeks, some months, whatever, it might be turned a little bit lower, but overall, you're still in the kind of sweet spot. But that allows you to turn the dial up on other things, like you're moving country. It's like that's a major life like change, It's like, okay, so you're turning the dial up on that other thing. You're not going to be as focused on your training for the week, 2 weeks as you move and you do whatever. Your diet's not going to be absolutely dialed in perfect, but you're still doing the kind of sweet spot, the middle. Your dial isn't turned up to the top, but it's, you're still doing well with it, and I think that's, we talked about this before, where, I always view your life as various seasons. Like there's different seasons throughout your life. It's like sometimes you're in a competitive season, sometimes you're in a like building season, etc. And I feel like right now you're going in for the next like 3 years of a nice building season. So a lot of that stuff can be, we'll call it automated. It can kind of put it on an autopilot, we'll say. It's like, what calories and macros you roughly need to hit. You don't need to be eating out of Tupperware, eating like, oh, I like the exact same foods every single day. During prep, you might have done something like that because it just gets rid of a lot of variables, get rid of a lot of like mental thinking. But now you're like, oh, I can eat out, I can do XYZ, I can enjoy food a bit more, and I feel like you're in a nice building phase. And obviously, that also comes around with your business. Like right now, I know you have loads of spaces open for coaching, because the last year or so you've had to limit your numbers purely because, like, I know you like to provide a high level of service, and with all the other things that you had going on, you couldn't provide that high level service to 20x extra clients, but I know going forward you do have a lot more client spaces available. And obviously this is also part, like you were saying, you spend some time on your education, different phases or whatever. Like I view this year as well for you as an education experience. Like you learned a lot about competing in powerlifting, competing in bodybuilding, and that's only going to help you with your clients going forward as well, you know? But I suppose, is there any, like, I know we've kind of touched on it, but what's the kind of goal in the next 5 years, we'll say? Because I want people to also think that you want to set 3, 5, 10-year goals with bodybuilding, powerlifting, all this kind of stuff, because it does take time to actually build something. You know, you often see physique competitors of various types, you know, bikini competitors like women, men in like men's physique, less so with the bodybuilders, but even there you do see it as well, where people compete every single year and they don't actually make a huge amount of progress year on year. You know, like they might make some progress, like a year is a long time, but if you take it that you're going to do a competition, you're going to spend the next, let's say, 10 to 12 weeks probably recovering from that competition, and then you've got what, 3, 4 months of actual good building before you have to start dieting again, you know? So you've only got 4 months, we'll say, before of actual like building your physique if you're then going to try compete the next year, you know? So I much more am an advocate of taking a couple of years in between competitions. But what is your thought process on that, especially as it relates to you? What's your thought process in terms of when do you think you're next going to compete? Is it going to be powerlifting first, or is it going to be bodybuilding? What's the story there?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, I probably won't do a powerlifting competition until like summer or like around Christmas time of like 2023. And like again, like powerlifting is, while it was probably towards the end of the bodybuilding prep, something I didn't really think I was going to be keen to get back into. It's what has built me a decent amount of like the base I have right now. It's something that gives me a huge amount of enjoyment in my training. Again, the competitions, like the powerlifting competitions, like serve me as like a kind of stop off place to kind of assess my progress. So again, like if I can see by 2025 when I do another bodybuilding season that I've brought my 700 kilo up to like 750, 775 or something like that, like I'll again, like these are like, once you like start passing 700, like passing that number is like, you know, you're making pretty substantial like kind of gains in terms of like where like on a world level almost, you know. So I want to get like as close to like kind of almost like a world elite level standard as I possibly can over like the next few years, like in powerlifting. Like one of my like long-term goals with powerlifting is to like represent Ireland at one stage. Like that would be just so cool. To get onto an international platform. Like again, it doesn't matter come first or last, like just be up there wearing an Irish singlet would be amazing. So like that's like one of my long-term goals with that. So I want to just continue building, like whether I that takes me until I'm a master's, like when I'm like what, I think master's like 39 or something like that. So like if it takes me up to then, like that, so be it. Like that's like one of my kind of overarching goals with powerlifting. And then like the powerlifting goal along the way is just to continue building that total up, and you know, have that as my kind of benchmark of like, you know, my physique development process. And then by the time I compete in 2025, I should be a little bit more jacked. And then with the bodybuilding, I suppose, because a lot of it is going to be related to, you know, those increases in strength and like, you know, increase in muscle mass over time. Like, you know, I definitely will be like setting some kind of like body weight goals as such. So like my peak weight that I've ever been at was like 98 kilos, which was like April in 2021. And like I want to get back to around like that kind of similar weight, but like at a better body composition, which hopefully by this stage I will have a little bit more muscle mass along the way. So it should sit on me a little bit better by the time I get to it. Now I'm 86 at the moment now, so I'm like what, 9-10 kilos since I finished the bodybuilding shows. And like now like that kind of rate body weight increase is kind of slow down, so I probably won't reach that like actual peak weight until potentially like the end of 2023, if not like the kind of mid or start of 2024, which is completely fine. I want to have this kind of body weight increase to be relatively slow and gradual, especially as I am like at a more kind of like sport advanced level of training advancement at this stage. So it shouldn't be a kind of fast process. So then in regards to like those kind of being kind of goals that I can work towards, so like, you know, seeing that kind of the total move up over time, you know, it was just related down to like my processes day to day, me showing up to training, me kind of setting smaller kind of training goals along the way, to get myself towards them. Like that's like something I can control. I can control my body weight increase up to whatever the 98 odd kilos. Again, relate down to me putting the graft in the gym, me being diligent with my assessment of my physical process or physical progress. My tracking of macros, my diligency with my calorie intake throughout the weeks. All related to like things I can control. Then like things I can't control in regards to like bodybuilding season. So obviously the next bodybuilding season, like this one was all about, again, similar to my first powerlifting show, was all about competing and getting up on stage and kind of seeing where I did kind of measure in regards to like people who have been doing it for a long time. Being able to get to like travel, that kind of stuff was like an added bonus. But I would like to, again, by the time I do compete in bodybuilding again, would be to like, one would be to win an overall, like just to win an overall in Ireland would be class, because I won my two classes at the Irish competitions, but I didn't win an overall. Which, so overall essentially is like you win between like the lightweight bodybuilding, the heavyweight bodybuilding, the middleweight bodybuilding, the novice, the masters, the teens, the juniors, and you're like the best of the lot of them, right? And I didn't necessarily win either of those this year, so that's like one of the goals I have. And then after that is to place higher in like the European competitions. Now again, placings are not necessarily something that I can control, but they are something that I can definitely I can strive towards in a sense. But it is just going to be related down to, well, number one, who shows up in the day, but how much kind of effort I put forward in like the next 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, 100%. Anyway, do you have anything else to kind of wrap this up with, or anything else that you want to say to any of your avid followers who have been following your journey along the way? Because obviously, look, it's realistically only starting. You have another 20 years of good competing left in you,
That's it.
So do you have anything else to say? And what kind of people are you looking to work with in terms of coaching this year? Because I know you do have a good few places on your roster open.
Yeah. So I suppose like one thing you did mention in regards to like the kind of seasons. So like this year, because obviously last year I had to take my foot off the coaching gas in respect, like while I was giving a lot of attention towards current clients at the time, my capacity to like take in new people and kind of give them the same level of attention as I would have been giving like even towards myself for a time period was definitely limited, right? Because that's one thing I did find a little bit kind of more challenging throughout the prep. Like, as stuff started to get a little bit harder, started to get a little bit more like impatient with things. So like, definitely like one actually kind of interesting thing with bodybuilding towards the end is like you definitely like start to like lose a lot of like apathy and empathy, or you become a bit more apathetic, just as a result of like you don't necessarily have much emotions left towards the end of prep. It's just a case of I'm gonna get up and do my things, and that's it. But like that's restored now. Okay, very very much kind of reassuring you that that is restored. So yeah, over the next year, I want to help more people essentially gear towards their competitive goals, right? Because there's going to be a lot of people who are in a similar situation to how I was in a few years ago, where they've like maybe had these goals like on the back foot or on the back burner, and they have never really kind of like committed themselves towards that. And like one thing that does help massively is just like, well, number one, having a coach, but like also just like committing to the process. Like there's nothing that's going to make you commit to a process more than, number one, entering into competition, number two, paying somebody to make sure that you get towards that competition. And that's essentially like what coaching can do, because like I know for a fact, if over like the last 3 years I did not have coaching towards these competitions that I was doing, I would not have done nearly as well as I would have. Like even like working with my own coach at the moment for bodybuilding, like he's taught me a lot in regards to the whole bodybuilding process, and then putting yourself through the experience as well kind of teaches you even more so about that. But like I know for a fact there will be a lot of people who just have not necessarily kind of put their foot down and say, right, this is something that I'm going to do. So, if you are looking to get involved in competing, whether it be powerlifting, whether it is thinking that you would be right for bodybuilding, like, do get in touch and we can have a chat. Because like even with the bodybuilding, like I will say, I don't think it's probably something that I would almost advise people against, unless they are like 2 or 3 years outside of like living the kind of like more bodybuilding kind of focused life,
because it is intense, right? It's not like an easy thing to do. Like you do have to make a lot of sacrifices along the way. It's long drawn out. It's not a holiday diet, right? Like it's a real test of like your kind of mental kind of character. So like it would be advisable that you do get in touch, because like if you have not been living, you know, a very consistent bodybuilder-esque lifestyle for like more or for like, you know, more than 2 years, like you probably need a little bit more time to, one, develop the muscle mass that you need to actually get on stage, and like, you know, be very proud of what you will have built by the time you do diet down, but also to just make sure you have like the foundational habits in place that will actually get you to stage without like falling apart mentally by the time you get there.
Yeah, and I think this is important as well, because both bodybuilding and powerlifting are multi-year goals, right? But that doesn't mean that you need to have coaching for all those years, you know? Like you just need someone to set you up correctly. You need someone to put you on the right track. You need someone to go, oh, these are the things that you should be focusing on. This is how we would roughly design a program. This is how we'd roughly design the diet to help you get to those goals in 2 or 3 years' time, you know? Now, obviously, look, the best case scenario is to get coaching the whole way for 3 years and then compete. That would be obviously the best case scenario. But like you did with abs, you went in and you got great results without getting the one-to-one, you know? You were following a system, you know? And like that's something that I know you do a little bit of, where you help people like, you know, sort out their programming. You know, you do a lot of that in-house. If one of Brian or Dean's clients, they want a bit of like training programming, you're like, okay, well, we'll set things up for you, right? So obviously the best case scenario here is someone gets coaching with you for 3 years, then competes in powerlifting or bodybuilding. But if not, what are you kind of taking people through if they come to you and they're like, look, Shane, I want to compete in August. You know, it's January now. They're like, I want to compete in August in powerlifting or bodybuilding. I don't even know if there's competitions then, but yeah, well, let's just say August, right? They're like, that's when I want to compete. What's the process for you? You know, maybe there's someone that has been on and off with training. They're like decent level of muscle mass, decent level of strength. Are you going, right, this is doable? Or are we just using this as a kind of a gauge, a bit of a warm up? Now, I don't think you'd necessarily do that with bodybuilding. If someone came to me and said that with bodybuilding, I'd probably be like, bro, we need to take 5 years to get to this level. But I feel like with powerlifting, if you just want to go in and compete and test yourself, you can kind of jump in a bit earlier. Maybe that's my hubris and my lack of understanding of the sport, but I feel like that's a little bit easier with powerlifting. Would that be the case?
Yeah, no, definitely. Like, to be honest, like with a lot of clients who have like kind of strength goals as such, I will kind of nudge them in the direction of like competing in powerlifting competitions like pretty early on, mainly for the fact that, again, like it's motivating for them to commit themselves to. It gives them like a very good direction towards achieving their strength goals in like a specific period of time. And then as well, like generally once they do one, they're like, I want to do more of those. You know, that was fantastic. Love, like, you know, the fact that they could get up on platform and everybody's there cheering for them all at the one time. Like everybody being very supportive. They get to meet more like-minded people on the day when they're training or when they're competing. You know, get to compete against people who maybe of like a similar experience level or strength level. So like it's a good way for them to kind of maybe kind of mingle in circles where they may not have necessarily gotten to mingle themselves in if they were just training in their own gym. And again, yeah, you don't necessarily need to have like any specific standard to hit before you compete in a powerlifting competition. Now, you don't necessarily need to do it in a bodybuilding competition either. But again, like, you know, if somebody's been training like, you know, 6 months and don't have like great genetics, inconsistent with training, and they show up in a bodybuilding stage, you know, you're gonna be one of those people who doesn't get looked at all, and people are like, that guy lost, like, you know. So like there's definitely a bit longer timeline. So like if somebody came to me like now and like was on and off with training, and they're like, they may have good muscle mass, they may have good strength, but if they're on and off with training and like, you know, here and there with the nutrition, and they're looking to compete in August, I'd say, well, you need to kind of prove to me first that you can be consistent for a year before you even decide to go into bodybuilding prep. Because well, like once like you commit to prep, like it's gonna be serious, right? It's like it's a serious goal, and I'm expecting like a serious pro level like commitment to the process. Like you're not like intermittently hitting your macros. You're hitting your macros every day. You're not intermittently shadow training. You're shadow training. Training is like the thing that you need to do. You're like, if something comes up at the weekend, you're prioritizing all the prep things around that thing that you need to do the weekend, as opposed to the thing you need to do the weekend, right? Like that is like, once you get into a prep, like that's pretty much like your kind of the only goal that you should have at that time, in my opinion. Like if you get to an experience level where you can make it something that happens in the background, like that is amazing, but that could be like 10-20 years into the actual kind of experience itself. Like if like it's your first year, you need to kind of treat it like this is like my baby, and I'm going to take care of it as much as I can. So yeah, like if you're looking to get into a bodybuilding prep now and you're inconsistent, like it would need to be a case of like, okay, like can you go through a consistent gaining phase for like the next like 6 to 8 months, and then go through a consistent diet for like 12 to 16 weeks, and like not miss a beat. If you can do that, then I probably will have a little bit more trust that you can get into a bodybuilding prep and be able to actually kind of accomplish it to a degree that you want to. Because at the end of the day, like as a coach, we bear a lot of the responsibility of like the like success and the failures of our clients. And like, I don't want somebody like, at the end of the process being like, he could have kept me more in line, or like I wasn't ready in time, and then that comes back on me because I should have been the one that told somebody that whether they were ready or not. And then again, at the end of the day, it's as I mentioned in regards to the mental process, like how many people get into bodybuilding as a way to like mask their poor body image issues or poor like dietary issues in relation to like binge eating, that kind of thing. And like you do need to have that time to kind of get somebody kind of assess in that aspect, because like that person could be inconsistent with their diet, or they could be inconsistent with their training because they have some of those issues going on. Like maybe that is like they're inconsistent with their diet because not because like they don't like following the process, but maybe they have like some kind of binge eating issues at the weekend. That shit needs to be smoothed out before you start a bodybuilding prep. Like that can't be going on, because at the end of the day, like that will, number one, detract from the actual kind of thing you're going to bring to the stage, but detract from like your mental state throughout the entire process. Because if you have this deadline that's coming up, and you see that like maybe week to week, or like every second week, that you're having this kind of like relapse into kind of old behaviors that are not kind of helping you towards the process, you will start to get like quite stressed and anxious because you're not getting towards where you need to be in that kind of certain time frame, and that kind of date is coming up at a certain stage as well. So that may kind of lead you into kind of poor habits or bad practices in the actual lead up to the competition. And whether you tell your coach or not, like that is really going to be up to you and the kind of relationship you do have with the coach, which again, the bodybuilding or coaching in general, it's a relationship. So you should be able to tell your coach pretty much anything. Especially if it is like a relation to like, binge eating or something like that. Like you need to be able to tell your coach, because they're there to help you at the end of the day, not to judge. But if you are having this thing that is kind of popping up throughout a prep, and if you're not telling your coach, then it's going to be a case of like, well, I didn't really get the support that I needed to actually kind of facilitate me and kind of eradicate this problem. And then as well, from the coach's perspective, they may not be none the wiser as to why this is occurring. And they will also feel that they may need to just kind of push you a little bit harder because you're not getting results. So then as well, they start to cut your calories, they start to increase your cardio, and then the problem starts to exacerbate itself even more so. And then the relationship can like disintegrate completely, and the client then could be left in a completely terrible headspace by the end of the actual prep itself.
Yeah, and this is why coaching is, or it has to be, a collaborative process. Like you have to, like you're building a relationship with your clients. And I know like this year, you even throughout your prep and stuff, like you did bring a lot of clients to powerlifting stages, for example, like you had a lot of clients that competed in powerlifting. And while that's obviously different than bodybuilding, like it's still something where you have to be dialed in and they have to communicate with you what's going on in their life, because all that stuff does affect your training. It does affect your ability to perform, if your sleep is off, your stress, etc. So like if you're going to commit to the process, you need to commit. And just on that as well, like that, what you were saying earlier on, like if you're going to get someone to compete, you want to kind of see them pretty fucking dialed in with everything. That's what I say to people who want to do steroids. I'm like, look, you want to do steroids because you think it's a quick fix, but let's see if you can stay the course for whatever 12, 16 weeks with good training, good nutrition, etc., before you even consider that stuff. Because very often people go, oh, I'm going to go on steroids to mask all their other crappy habits. They're not getting the results that they want because they're not actually committed to the process, where I'm like, look, commit to the process for 6 months, get your calories and macros dialed in. We're not deviating from that. Okay, yeah, a little bit over here or there, fine, but you're 99% dialed in with things before you even consider any of that stuff. And very often people do that and they're like, oh, actually, I don't need to do this. I'm actually making results, or I'm actually getting results now. I'm actually making gains, But anyway, look, we'll wrap this up here. I'm sure you'll be on the podcast again, and everyone obviously should be following you because, there's a lot of exciting things coming up over the next few years for you. Where can people find you on Instagram?
Yeah, so you just follow my Instagram, which is at @story94. And then you can also follow my YouTube. So I haven't had a video in like the last month just with Christmas. I mean, like nobody really wants to see me documenting like me going on nights out and eating like a pig during that process. Well, the last video actually was me eating like a pig, so maybe you do. But you can follow my YouTube, just type Shane Storey or Powerlifter the Bodybuilder. So yeah, I suppose like the next series will be coming out like very, very soon. So yeah, make sure you are following along to follow my kind of journey throughout the process, as well as keep up to date with like client results, things like just general information I share on Instagram as well. And yeah, thank you very much for having me.
Fantastic. And I will have it linked below where all Shane's stuff is. And also I will have linked the online coaching page. So if you're interested in getting coaching and you're like, oh, look, I want to talk to Shane, I want to get coaching with Shane, you can either get in contact through there, or you can contact Shane on Instagram. I know you chat to people in the DMs, see if they're a good fit for you, see if there's someone that, maybe you could take to the stage, or, maybe you're just looking for body composition results. They just want to get healthier, fitter, stronger, generally more muscular, whatever it is. You have a lot of clients like that as well. So yeah, look, anyway, guys, we will see you in the next one. And that can't even speak. And I hope everyone has a fantastic year.